The summer of 1997 was supposed to be a celebration. 7 cousins, ranging in age from 19 to 26, packed their cars with camping gear, fishing rods, and enough groceries to last a long weekend at Harlow Lake, a secluded body of water nestled in the dense pine forests of western North Carolina. The lake wasn't marked on most maps. The local residents knew it as a quiet spot where the water ran deep and cold, fed by underground springs that kept the temperature frigid even in August. There were no marinas, no boat rentals, no convenience stores within 15 miles. Just woods, water, and silence. The cousins had grown up together in the small town of Piedmont Falls, attending the same schools, celebrating the same holidays, sharing the same grandparents. They were more like siblings than distant relatives. This trip was meant to be their last hurrah before life pulled them in different directions. College graduations, new jobs, engagements, adulthood was closing in, and they wanted one final adventure before responsibilities took over. They arrived at Harlow Lake on Friday, July 18th, at approximately 3 in the afternoon. The sky was clear, the temperature hovering around 87 degrees. They set up camp on the eastern shore, where a small clearing provided enough space for 3 tents and a fire pit. The nearest occupied cabin was over 2 miles away, owned by an elderly couple who spent most of their time indoors. The cousins had the lake to themselves. Their names were Ethan Vale, 26, the oldest and the unofficial leader of the group. He worked as an electrician and had recently proposed to his girlfriend, planning a wedding for the following spring. His younger sister, Nicole Vale, 24, taught 3rd grade at Piedmont Falls Elementary. She was known for her infectious laugh and her habit of bringing her camera everywhere, documenting every moment. Then there was Kevin Marsh, 23, Ethan and Nicole's cousin on their mother's side. Kevin had just graduated from community college with a degree in automotive repair and had already lined up a job at a dealership in Charlotte. His twin sister, Veronica Marsh, was the quieter of the two, studying to become a nurse. She carried a first aid kit in her backpack, a habit their mother had instilled in her years earlier. The youngest of the group was Tyler Horn, 19, fresh out of high school and undecided about his future. He played guitar and talked about moving to Nashville someday, though no one knew if he was serious. His older brother, Dylan Horn, 22, was studying computer science at a state university and spent most of his free time tinkering with electronics. Dylan had brought a handheld CB radio on the trip, insisting it would be useful in case of emergencies. Cell phones didn't work out there, and landlines were non-existent. Finally, there was Olivia Grant, 21, their cousin from their father's side. She was the artist of the family, always sketching in a worn leather notebook she carried everywhere. Olivia had recently returned from a semester abroad in Italy and was full of stories about ancient ruins and cobblestone streets. She told the others she wanted to paint the lake at sunrise, capturing the mist that rose off the water in the early morning hours. The first day passed without incident. They fished, swam, and cooked hot dogs over an open fire. Nicole took dozens of photographs, laughing as she tried to get everyone to pose together. Dylan fiddled with his CB radio, picking up scattered transmissions from truckers on distant highways. Tyler played his guitar, strumming familiar songs while the others sang along, their voices echoing across the still water. That night, they stayed up late, trading stories and roasting marshmallows. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the darkness. The woods around them were alive with the sounds of crickets and frogs, a symphony of summer noise that felt comforting rather than ominous. They went to bed around midnight, tired but content, looking forward to another day of swimming and relaxation. Saturday began much the same way. The sun rose over the lake, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Olivia woke early, just as she'd planned, and set up her easel near the water's edge. She worked in silence, her brush moving quickly across the canvas as she tried to capture the ethereal quality of the morning light. The others woke gradually, emerging from their tents one by one, stretching and yawning. By mid-morning, they were all awake and discussing their plans for the day. Ethan suggested taking one of the canoes they'd brought and exploring the far side of the lake, where thick vegetation made it difficult to see the shore. Kevin wanted to try his luck fishing in deeper water, convinced he'd catch something bigger than the small bass they'd pulled in the day before. Veronica announced she was perfectly happy reading her book in the shade, and no one tried to change her mind. It was Dylan who first noticed something strange. He'd been scanning through frequencies on his CB radio, half listening to the static and garbled voices, when he picked up a transmission that made him pause. It wasn't the usual chatter from truckers or farmers. This was different. A man's voice, low and urgent, speaking in short bursts. Dylan couldn't make out all the words, but he caught fragments, something about coordinates, something about a deadline, something about being careful. He mentioned it to Ethan, who shrugged it off. Probably just someone messing around, Ethan said. Maybe hunters or park rangers doing their jobs. Dylan wasn't convinced, but he didn't press the issue. He turned the radio off and joined the others for breakfast. The day unfolded slowly, lazily, the way summer days do when there's nowhere to be and nothing urgent to accomplish. They swam, ate sandwiches, napped in the shade. Nicole continued taking photos, filling roll after roll of film. Tyler practiced new chord progressions on his guitar. Olivia worked on her painting, adding layers of color and detail. But as afternoon bled into evening, a subtle shift occurred. It started with small things. A feeling of being watched, though none of them could pinpoint why. And the woods, which had seemed welcoming the day before, now felt denser, darker, more oppressive. The temperature dropped several degrees and clouds moved in, blocking the sun. The light turned gray and flat, draining the color from everything. Kevin was the first to voice his unease. He stood at the edge of the water, fishing rod in hand, staring across the lake. "Something's off," he said. The others gathered around him, following his gaze. At first they didn't see anything unusual. Just water, trees, sky. But then Nicole pointed, and they all saw it. A boat, small and dark, moving slowly along the far shore. It wasn't a canoe or a kayak. It looked motorized, though they couldn't hear an engine from that distance. Who would be out here? Veronica asked. There were no other campers, no cabins on that side of the lake. Ethan grabbed a pair of binoculars from his backpack and trained them on the boat. He watched for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he lowered the binoculars and shook his head. "Just someone fishing," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Let's not worry about it." But worry had already taken root. That night, the mood around the campfire was different. The easy laughter from the night before was gone, replaced by quiet conversation and long pauses. Dylan tried the CB radio again, but all he got was static. Tyler played his guitar, but the songs he chose were slower, sadder. Olivia sat apart from the others, staring into the flames, her notebook forgotten in her lap. They went to bed earlier than planned, around 10 o'clock. The temperature had dropped further, and a light rain began to fall, pattering softly against the tents. Ethan made sure the fire was extinguished completely before retreating to his tent. He lay awake for a long time, listening to the rain, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. Sometime after midnight, a sound woke him. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. The woman's scream, sharp and brief, cutting through the rain and the darkness. Ethan sat up, his heart pounding. He waited, listening, but the scream didn't come again. Just the rain, steady and rhythmic. He unzipped his tent and stepped outside. The rain had intensified, and he was soaked within seconds. He called out softly, asking if anyone else had heard it. Dylan emerged from his tent, followed by Kevin. They'd heard it too. Nicole and Veronica joined them, their faces pale in the dim light of Dylan's flashlight. Tyler and Olivia came last, both looking confused and frightened. They stood together in the rain, 7 young people in the middle of nowhere, trying to decide what to do. Ethan suggested checking the perimeter of their campsite, making sure no one was hurt or in trouble. They spread out, staying within sight of each other, searching the woods with their flashlights. But they found nothing. No footprints, no signs of struggle, no indication that anyone else was nearby. They returned to the campsite, cold and wet and uneasy. Maybe it was an animal, Veronica suggested. A fox or a rabbit, but no one believed that. The sound had been too human, too distressed. They agreed to stay alert, to keep watch in shifts. Ethan and Kevin took the first shift, sitting by the remains of the fire pit, wrapped in blankets, their flashlights pointed toward the woods. The rain continued through the night. Nothing else happened. No more screams, no strange sounds. By the time dawn broke, they were exhausted, their nerves frayed. They discussed leaving early, cutting the trip short and heading home. But Ethan pointed out that the rain had turned the dirt road leading out of the area into a muddy mess. Their cars would never make it. They'd have to wait for the ground to dry, at least a few hours. So they stayed. They made coffee, ate granola bars, tried to shake off the tension from the night before. The rain stopped around mid-morning, and the sun broke through the clouds, warming the air. Spirits lifted slightly. Maybe they'd overreacted, they told themselves, and maybe it had been an animal after all. But then Dylan's CB radio crackled to life. He'd left it on, hoping to pick up a weather report or some indication of when the roads would be passable. Instead, he got something else. A voice, clear and deliberate, speaking directly into the transmission. "You shouldn't be here," the voice said. "Leave now. The gas, leave now." The words sent a chill through the group. Dylan tried to respond, but the transmission cut off before he could speak. He switched frequencies, scanning desperately, but found only static. "Who was that?" Nicole asked, her voice shaking. Dylan had no answer. None of them did. Ethan made the decision. They were leaving. Roads or no roads, they were packing up and getting out. They worked quickly, dismantling tents, stuffing gear into backpacks, dousing the fire pit with water. Within an hour, they were ready to go. They loaded the cars, checked to make sure nothing was left behind, and prepared to drive out. But when Ethan turned the key in his ignition, nothing happened. The engine didn't turn over, didn't even click. He tried again. Still nothing. Kevin checked his car, same problem. Dylan's car, the third vehicle, was equally dead. All three cars, completely non-functional. Panic set in. They checked the batteries, the wiring, anything they could think of. Kevin, with his automotive training, spent nearly an hour under the hood of Ethan's car, searching for the problem. But he found nothing wrong. The cars simply wouldn't start, as if something had drained them of power overnight. They were stranded. No working vehicles, no cell service, no way to call for help. The nearest town was over 20 miles away, and the dirt road was still too muddy to walk safely. Dylan tried the CB radio again, broadcasting a distress call on every frequency he could find. But there was no response, just static. As the sun climbed higher, the temperature rose, and the mud began to dry. They discussed their options. Wait for someone to pass by, though no one had seen another person since they'd arrived. Walk out, risking the muddy road and the long distance. Or stay put, hoping the cars would mysteriously start working again. Ethan suggested they stay together, set up a single tent, and wait until the next morning. If the cars still didn't work, they'd start walking at dawn. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was something. The others agreed, too exhausted and frightened to argue. They spent the afternoon in tense silence. Nicole tried to distract herself by reviewing her photographs, but the images felt like relics from another lifetime. Tyler played his guitar, but his fingers stumbled over the chords. Olivia sat alone, staring at her unfinished painting, unable to add another brushstroke. As evening approached, Dylan picked up another transmission on the CB radio. This time it was a different voice, higher-pitched, almost frantic. "Don't trust him," the voice said. "He's watching you." Then, like before, the transmission cut off. Tyler stood up abruptly, his face pale. "I'm done," he said. "I'm walking out of here. Right now." Dylan grabbed his arm, trying to calm him down, but Tyler pulled free. "I don't care about the mud or the distance. I'm not staying here another night." Kevin stepped in, blocking Tyler's path. "We stay together. he said firmly. No one goes anywhere alone. The argument escalated quickly. Voices rose, tempers flared. In the chaos, no one noticed that Olivia had wandered away from the group. She'd heard something, a faint sound coming from the woods, a melody like someone humming. She followed it, curiosity overriding caution, her sketchbook clutched in her hand. By the time the others realized she was gone, it was too late. They called her name, searching the woods with their flashlights, but she didn't respond. Ethan organized them into pairs, each taking a different direction, promising to stay within shouting distance. But as the sun set and darkness closed in, the woods became a labyrinth. Sounds echoed strangely, distances became impossible to judge. Dylan and Veronica headed north, calling Olivia's name over and over. Kevin and Nicole went west, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. Tyler and Ethan moved south, toward the lake. The search continued for hours, but there was no sign of Olivia. No footprints, no trail, nothing. By midnight, they were back at the campsite, defeated and terrified. Olivia was gone. They tried the CB radio again, broadcasting an emergency call, begging for help. But the only response was static. Then, just before they gave up, a new voice came through. A man's voice, calm and measured. "She's safe," the voice said. "All for now. If you want to see her again, you will do exactly as I say." And the transmission ended. Dylan tried to respond, but there was no answer. They sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they'd just heard. Someone had taken Olivia. Someone was out there watching them, controlling them, and they had no idea who or why. Ethan stood, his jaw set, his hands clenched into fists. "We find her," he said. "We are not leaving without her." The others nodded, their fear hardening into determination. They didn't know what they were up against, but they knew one thing. They weren't going to abandon their cousin. As the night stretched on, they kept watch, waiting for another transmission, another clue. The woods around them were silent, oppressive. The lake reflected the moon, its surface smooth and black. Somewhere out there, Olivia was being held. Somewhere out there, someone was playing a game they didn't understand. And the clock was ticking. The rain started again, heavier this time, turning the ground to mud once more. The temperature dropped, and the wind picked up, shaking the trees and sending leaves skittering across the campsite. They huddled together under a tarp, shivering, exhausted, their minds racing with possibilities. Was Olivia hurt? Was she scared? Was she still alive? Dylan kept the CB radio on, listening for any sign, any message. The hours crawled by. 2 in the morning, 3, 4. And then, just before dawn, the radio crackled again. In the same calm voice, the same measured tone. "Look in the water," it said. "You will find what you need." The transmission ended. They stared at each other, confusion and dread swirling together. Look in the water. What did that mean? Ethan grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the lake, the others following close behind. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still dark, the sun not yet risen. They stood at the water's edge, shining their lights across the surface. At first they saw nothing, just water, black and still. But then Nicole pointed, her hand trembling. "There," she whispered, "near the shore." They moved closer, their lights converging on a single spot. Something was floating in the water, just beneath the surface. Something pale and rectangular. Kevin waded in, the cold water soaking his jeans. He reached down and pulled the object free. It was a plastic container, sealed tight, about the size of a shoebox. He carried it back to shore and set it on the ground. Ethan knelt beside it, his hands shaking as he pried off the lid. Inside was a Polaroid photograph. It showed Olivia, sitting in a chair, her hands bound, her mouth gagged. Her eyes were wide with terror. Behind her, the wall was bare concrete, giving no indication of where she was being held. But there was something else in the photograph. A piece of paper, taped to the wall beside her. On it, written in block letters, were 3 words: "You have time." Below that, a series of numbers, coordinates. They stared at the photograph, their minds struggling to make sense of it. The coordinates. Someone was giving them a location. Someone wanted them to find Olivia. But why? And what would be waiting for them when they got there? Dylan pulled out a map from his backpack, spreading it on the ground. He traced the coordinates with his finger, his expression darkening. "It's northwest of here," he said. "About 5 miles into the woods. No trails, no roads, just forest." Ethan stood, his decision made. "We go now." Veronica protested, pointing out that they were exhausted, that it could be a trap. But Ethan cut her off. "She's our family," he said. "We are not leaving her." The others fell silent, knowing he was right. They gathered their gear, packing light. Flashlights, water, the first aid kit, the CB radio. They left everything else behind. As the sun rose, casting pale light through the trees, they set off into the woods, following the coordinates, walking toward whatever was waiting for them. The forest was dense, the underbrush thick and tangled. Progress was slow. They moved in single file, Ethan in the lead, Dylan checking the map every few minutes to make sure they were on course. The temperature climbed as the sun rose higher, and sweat soaked their clothes. But they didn't stop. After 2 hours, they reached a clearing. In the center stood an old structure, half collapsed and overgrown with vines. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The roof was gone, the walls crumbling. But it was the only building for miles. "This has to be it," Ethan said. They approached cautiously, their eyes scanning for any sign of danger. The door hung off its hinges, creaking in the breeze. Ethan pushed it open and stepped inside, the others following. The interior was dark and musty, filled with debris and rotting wood. But in the back corner they found something that made their blood run cold. It's a chair, the same chair from the photograph. But Olivia wasn't in it. The ropes that had bound her were lying on the floor, cut cleanly. She was gone. "Maestri, boom." And on the wall, written in red paint, was a new message. "It's too slow. Benter." The words on the wall seemed to pulse in the dim light filtering through the collapsed roof. Too slow. 2 words that carried the weight of failure, of terror, of something far worse than any of them had imagined. Ethan slammed his fist against the crumbling concrete, sending chunks of debris scattering across the floor. They'd been led here deliberately, given coordinates, given timestamps, only to arrive at an empty room with a message designed to break them. Nicole sank to her knees, her camera forgotten around her neck, her hands covering her face. Veronica moved to comfort her, but her own hands were shaking too badly to offer much support. Kevin paced the small space, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. Tyler stood frozen in the doorway, his guitar abandoned back at the campsite, his young face aged by exhaustion and fear. Dylan moved toward the chair, examining the cut ropes with a methodical precision that seemed almost detached from the horror of the situation. "These weren't sawed through," Dylan said quietly, his fingers tracing the clean edges. "Someone used a knife. Sharp blade. Recent too, these cuts are fresh." He looked up at the others, his expression grim. "She was here. Maybe an hour ago, maybe less, and the revelation should have brought hope. If Olivia had been moved recently, she couldn't be far. But instead, it brought a new wave of dread. Someone had been watching them, timing their movements, staying just far enough ahead to remain out of reach. Someone who knew exactly how long it would take them to decode the coordinates, pack their gear, and make the trek through 5 miles of dense forest. Someone who had orchestrated every moment of the past 24 hours with terrifying precision. Ethan pulled out the Polaroid photograph again, studying it under the beam of his flashlight. There had to be something they'd missed, some detail that would give them another clue. But the image remained stubbornly unhelpful. Just Olivia, the chair, the bare walls, and those 3 words, "You have time." Except they didn't. Not really. Time was slipping away like water through their fingers, and with each passing moment Olivia was being taken further from their reach. "We need to split up," Kevin said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. "Cover more ground." Search the surrounding area. Look, maybe there's a trail, tire tracks, something that shows which direction they went. Ethan shook his head immediately. No, we stay together. That's exactly what this person wants, to separate us, pick us off one by one. We are not playing that game. But we are not playing any game well enough to win, Kevin shot back, his frustration boiling over. We have done everything they wanted, followed their clues, gone where they told us to go, and we are still losing. Look, maybe it's time we stop following their rules. The tension in the room escalated, two cousins facing off, while the others watched helplessly. Nicole stood, positioning herself between them. Stop it, she said, her voice hoarse from crying. This is what they want. US turning on each other, fighting, making mistakes. We need to think, not react. Dylan had moved to the far wall, examining something the others hadn't noticed. There were markings on the concrete, faint scratches that could have been dismissed as random damage. But when he angled his flashlight at just the right angle, they formed a pattern. Numbers again, different from the coordinates, that in a sequence. 3, 7, 9, 2, 8. What do those mean? Veronica asked, moving closer to see. Dylan shook his head slowly. Could be anything. A combination, a code, a date. Without context, it's just numbers. But someone took the time to carve them here. They mean something. He pulled out his notebook and copied the sequence carefully, his handwriting precise despite his trembling hands. We take everything, every detail. Something will connect eventually. They searched the rest of the structure methodically, looking for anything else that might help. But the building had been stripped clean except for the chair and the messages. No personal belongings, no tools, no indication of who had been here or where they'd gone. The floor was dirt and broken concrete, making it impossible to find clear footprints. Outside, the forest had swallowed any trail that might have existed. After 40 minutes of fruitless searching, they were forced to accept the truth. They had nothing. No new leads, no direction to go, no way to find Olivia. Ethan made the decision to head back to the campsite. They needed to regroup, try the CB radio again, maybe get the cars working. Sitting in an abandoned building wasn't helping anyone. The hike back took longer than the journey out. Exhaustion had set in, both physical and emotional. They moved in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, their own fears. The forest seemed different now, hostile rather than merely indifferent. Every shadow held potential threat. Every sound made them flinch. The sun climbed toward its peak, turning the humidity oppressive, making every breath feel thick and heavy. They reached the campsite around noon. Everything was exactly as they'd left it, tents collapsed, gear scattered. The three useless cars sitting like metal tombstones in the clearing. Dylan went immediately to his vehicle, popping the hood once more. Kevin joined him. The two of them bent over the engine, checking connections, testing wires. Ethan tried the CB radio, scanning through frequencies, broadcasting their location and situation. But the airways remained stubbornly silent. Nicole sat on a fallen log, her camera in her lap. She'd stopped taking photographs after that first night, but now she lifted it, looking through the viewfinder at the scene around her. The abandoned campsite, her cousins moving like ghosts through the wreckage of their vacation, the oppressive tree line surrounding them. She lowered the camera without taking the shot. Some moments weren't meant to be captured. Some memories were better left unrecorded. Tyler had retrieved his guitar and was sitting apart from the others, his fingers moving across the strings without producing sound. He was pressing the frets, going through the motions, but not actually playing. It was a comfort mechanism, something familiar to hold on to when everything else had spiraled into nightmare. Veronica watched him for a moment, then moved to sit beside him, not speaking, just offering presence. By mid-afternoon, Dylan and Kevin had to admit defeat. The cars weren't going to start. Whatever had been done to them wasn't something they could fix with basic tools and automotive knowledge. The batteries were fine, the wiring intact, the fuel lines clear. Yet none of the engines would even attempt to turn over. It was as if something fundamental had been removed or disabled, something neither of them could identify. We need to consider walking out, Veronica said, her nursing training kicking in despite her fear. We are running low on water. Food's not critical yet, but hydration is. In this heat, trying to walk 20+ miles could be dangerous, but staying here with no resources could be worse. Ethan nodded slowly, knowing she was right but hating the choice. If we walk out, we are abandoning Olivia. We are giving up. We are not giving up, Nicole said firmly. We are getting help. Real help. Police, search and rescue, people with resources we don't have. We can't save her if we die out here of dehydration or heat stroke. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to insist they keep searching, keep trying, but logic won out over emotion. They'd start walking at dawn, when the temperature was coolest. They'd ration their remaining water carefully. They'd make it to town and bring back an army. The decision made, they began preparing, packing light but essential items, planning their route, discussing how they'd ration supplies. But as evening approached, bringing with it the familiar dread of another night in this cursed place, Dylan's CB radio crackled to life once more. The voice that came through was different this time, not the calm, measured tone from before. This was ragged, desperate, barely above a whisper. Help me, please. Someone help me. It was Olivia. The effect was instantaneous. Everyone rushed to Dylan's position, crowding around the small radio. Dylan grabbed the transmitter, his hands shaking. Olivia, it's Dylan. Where are you? Can you tell us where you are? Static filled the airways for a long moment. Then Olivia's voice returned, even fainter than before. Cold. So cold. Underground. Water. I can hear water. Her words dissolved into static again. Dylan adjusted frequencies frantically, trying to re-establish the connection. Olivia, stay with us. What else can you hear? What do you see? But there was no response, just empty static stretching into silence. He tried for 10 minutes, broadcasting on every frequency, begging for another transmission. Nothing came. Nothing came. Underground, Kevin repeated, his mind working through the implications. With water. That could be a basement, a cellar, maybe a well. Ethan pulled out the map again, spreading it across the hood of his car. Are there any structures marked in this area? Anything underground? Dylan leaned over the map, tracing locations with his finger. There's an old mining operation about 8 miles northeast. Shut down in the 70s, according to this notation. It could have shafts, tunnels. That's not in the direction of the coordinates they gave us before, Veronica pointed out. This could be leading us somewhere completely different. Or it could be another trap. Tyler spoke up, his voice quiet but determined. What if that's the point? What if they have been moving her around, keeping us chasing, wearing us down? Ethan met his youngest cousin's eyes and saw the same exhaustion, the same fear, but also the same stubborn refusal to quit. We check the mine, Ethan decided. First light tomorrow. We take everything we can carry, and we check it. If she's not there, we continue walking toward town. But we don't leave until we have exhausted every possibility. The others nodded agreement, each knowing that this might be their last real chance to find Olivia alive. That night they took turns keeping watch in 2-hour shifts. Nobody wanted to sleep, but they forced themselves to rest in short intervals, knowing they'd need their strength. The forest around them remained eerily quiet. No animal sounds, no wind through the trees. Just oppressive silence that made every tiny noise seem amplified. During the 3 a.m. shift, Nicole thought she saw lights moving through the trees about half a mile away, but when she called Ethan over to look, there was nothing. Just darkness and her imagination running wild. Dawn broke gray and overcast, threatening rain. They packed quickly, dividing supplies among backpacks. Water bottles, energy bars, the first aid kit, flashlights with fresh batteries, the CB radio, the map, the compass. Kevin grabbed a tire iron from one of the cars, the closest thing to a weapon they had. Ethan took a hunting knife he'd brought for preparing fish. They were as ready as they'd ever be. The hike to the mine took 4 hours through increasingly difficult terrain. The forest grew denser, the undergrowth thicker. They had to navigate around fallen trees, steep ravines, areas where the ground turned marshy and treacherous. By the time they spotted the first signs of the old mining operation, they were covered in scratches, soaked with sweat, and running dangerously low on water. The mine entrance was partially collapsed, but there was enough space to slip through if they were careful. A rusted metal sign hung at an angle, the words "Danger, keep out" still barely visible beneath decades of corrosion. Wooden support beams framed the opening, some rotted through, others still holding despite their age. The darkness beyond the entrance seemed absolute, swallowing their flashlight beams after just a few feet. Ethan went first, squeezing through the gap in the collapsed entrance. The air inside was immediately cooler, damp, carrying the mineral smell of deep earth. His flashlight revealed a tunnel stretching ahead, the ceiling low enough that he had to duck in places. Wooden support structures lined the walls at regular intervals, many of them sagging or broken. The floor was uneven, a mixture of rock and pooled water that reflected their lights in strange patterns. One by one, the others followed him inside. 6 people moving through a tunnel that felt like it might collapse at any moment, searching for their missing cousin in a place that time had forgotten. The tunnel branched after about 50 yards, offering 3 different directions. Ethan stood at the junction, playing his light down each passage, trying to decide which way to go. That's when they heard it. Faint but unmistakable. The voice singing. The melody was distorted by distance and the acoustics of the tunnels, but they all recognized it. Olivia. She'd been humming that same tune the morning she disappeared, working on her painting by the lake. She was here. She was alive. They followed the sound down the left tunnel, moving faster now despite the danger. The singing grew louder, clearer, leading them deeper into the mine. The tunnel sloped downward, and the pooled water became more frequent, sometimes deep enough to soak their shoes. The temperature continued to drop. Their breath began to mist in the beam of their flashlights. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 minutes, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. Their lights swept the space, revealing rough stone walls, timber supports that looked ancient and unstable, and in the center of the chamber, a figure sitting on the ground. Olivia. She was hunched over, her arms wrapped around her knees, rocking slightly. Her clothes were filthy, her hair matted, but she appeared unharmed. She was the one singing, the melody continuing even as their lights fell on her. For a moment, nobody moved. The scene felt wrong somehow, staged. Then Nicole broke the spell, rushing forward with a cry of relief. "Wait," Dylan called out, but it was too late. Nicole had already reached Olivia, dropping to her knees beside her cousin. "Olivia, it's us. We found you. You are safe now." But Olivia didn't respond. She kept singing, kept rocking, her eyes unfocused and distant. Nicole touched her shoulder gently. "Olivia, can you hear me?" That's when the lights went out. All 6 flashlights died simultaneously, plunging the chamber into absolute darkness. For a heartbeat, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then chaos erupted. Shouts of confusion, the sound of people stumbling in the dark, trying to find each other. Someone screamed. Something crashed. And beneath it all, Olivia kept singing. When the lights flickered back on seconds later, the scene had changed. Olivia was standing now, no longer rocking, no longer singing. Her eyes were focused and aware, staring at something behind the group. They turned as one, following her gaze. A man stood in the tunnel entrance they'd come through. He was average height, average build, wearing dark clothing that blended into the shadows. His face was obscured by the angle of their flashlights, but his posture radiated calm confidence. In his hand, he held a device that looked like a modified remote control. He pressed a button, and all their flashlights died again. This time, they stayed off. The man's voice came from the darkness, smooth and unhurried. "You did well, better than the others, but not good enough." The sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber, but the acoustics made it impossible to tell which direction they came from. Multiple sets of footsteps. There was more than one person down here with them. Ethan's voice cut through the darkness. What do you want? Why are you doing this? Laughter answered him, cold and mechanical. I want you to understand. To really understand. You came here thinking you were invincible. 7 young people, full of life and confidence, thinking the world was yours. But the world doesn't belong to anyone. And neither do you. Lights blazed suddenly, but not their flashlights. Industrial work lights, mounted on stands around the perimeter of the chamber, flooding the space with harsh white illumination. The cousins shielded their eyes, temporarily blinded. When their vision adjusted, they saw the full scope of what they'd walked into. The chamber was larger than they'd thought, and it wasn't natural. This space had been excavated, expanded, modified. The walls were lined with equipment. Computers, monitors, radio equipment, power generators. The cables ran everywhere, creating a web across the floor and ceiling. And around the perimeter stood 5 more people, all wearing the same dark clothing as the man by the tunnel entrance, all watching with expressions that ranged from curiosity to something that looked disturbingly like pity. "Welcome," the man said, stepping fully into the light. His face was ordinary, forgettable, and the kind of face you'd pass on the street without a second glance. Middle-aged, clean-shaven, with eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. "Welcome to the experiment." Kevin lunged forward, the tire iron raised. He made it 3 steps before one of the other figures moved, faster than should have been possible, intercepting him and slamming him to the ground with practiced efficiency. The tire iron skittered away across the stone floor. Nobody else moved. The man continued as if nothing had happened. 26 years ago, this mine was the site of something remarkable, a discovery that changed everything we understood about human behavior, about consciousness, about the nature of reality itself. The government shut it down, sealed the records, buried the evidence. But some of us kept working, kept researching, kept testing. He gestured to the equipment around them. "This isn't about hurting you, it's about understanding. You were selected because of your bonds. 7 cousins, raised together, closer than most siblings. We wanted to see how those bonds would hold under pressure, how you'd function when stripped of modern convenience, isolated, hunted. Would you turn on each other? Would you sacrifice one to save the group? Would you abandon hope or cling to it beyond reason?" Nicole's voice shook but stayed steady. "Olivia. Where's the real Olivia?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "She's exactly where she's been for the past 30 hours. Safe, monitored, unharmed. That," he gestured to the figure they'd found singing, well, think of her as a puppet. Sophisticated robotics, advanced AI, enough of Olivia's recorded mannerisms to fool you in low light and high stress. Quite an achievement, really. The figure that looked like Olivia turned its head toward them with a mechanical whir that was suddenly obvious. Its mouth opened, and Olivia's voice came out, but distorted, artificial. "You failed the test." Then it powered down, slumping back to the ground like a discarded toy. Tyler's voice cracked as he spoke. "What happens now? Do you kill us? Make us disappear?" The man shook his head. "Nothing so dramatic. You will be released, returned to your vehicles, which will suddenly work again. You will drive home, file police reports that go nowhere. Eventually you will move on with your lives, though you will never quite shake the feeling that you are being watched. Because you will be. We will check in periodically, see how this experience shaped you. Long-term psychological effects are the most interesting part of any experiment." Ethan took a step forward, his hands raised non-threateningly. "Just tell us one thing. Why us? What made us special enough to torment?" The man considered the question for a moment. "Nothing made you special. That's the point. You were ordinary people in an ordinary situation, which makes you perfect subjects. Anyone can be tested. Anyone can be broken. The veneer of civilization is much thinner than people want to believe." One of the other figures spoke for the first time, a woman's voice. "The vehicles are ready. Transport is waiting topside. Do we proceed with release protocol? The man nodded. Release them. Full memory retention. I want them to remember every moment. The confusion, the fear, the hope, the failure, and it makes for better data. What followed happened quickly and efficiently. The cousins were separated, each led down a different tunnel by one of the figures. They shouted for each other, tried to resist, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. Ethan fought hardest, managing to land a solid punch before being restrained. But it changed nothing. One by one they were taken away. Ethan found himself alone in a narrow passage with the original man. Where are you taking me? Where's Olivia? The real Olivia? The man didn't answer, just kept walking, forcing Ethan to follow or be left behind in absolute darkness. After several minutes of twisting passages, they emerged into daylight that felt blinding after the darkness of the mine. They were in a different location than the entrance they'd used. A dirt clearing where two large vans sat waiting, engines running. The other cousins were already being loaded into one of the vehicles. But Ethan caught a glimpse of Nicole, of Dylan, all looking dazed and exhausted. Then he was pushed toward the second van, where a figure sat in the back seat. Olivia. The real Olivia this time, he could tell immediately. She looked tired, frightened, but unharmed. Relief washed over him so powerfully it nearly brought him to his knees. But before he could reach her, the man gripped his arm tightly. One more thing, he said quietly. We found something in those tunnels 26 years ago. Something that shouldn't exist. Something that changes the rules. You felt it down there, that wrongness, that sense that reality was bending. We have been trying to understand it ever since. You were part of that understanding. Thank you for your contribution. Then Ethan was shoved into the van, the door slamming shut behind him. The vehicle started moving immediately. He scrambled to Olivia, checking her over frantically. Are you okay? Did they hurt you? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I'm okay. Scared but okay. What's happening? What was all that? Ethan had no answers. He just held his cousin while the van carried them toward an uncertain destination. The drive lasted about 20 minutes. When the van finally stopped and the doors opened, they were back at their campsite. All 7 cousins were there, reunited. Their cars sat exactly as they'd left them. Someone had even re-erected one of the tents. And sitting on a camp chair that hadn't been there before was a plastic container like the one they'd found in the lake. The vans drove away without a word, disappearing down the muddy road as if they'd never been there. The cousins stood in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. Finally, Kevin walked over to the plastic container and opened it. Inside were their car keys, their wallets, Nicole's camera with fresh film, and a single sheet of paper. Dylan picked up the paper and read aloud. The experiment concluded at 0900 hours. All subjects responded within acceptable parameters. Data collection successful. Thank you for your participation. Vehicles have been restored to full functionality. Roads are clear for departure. This incident will not appear on any official record. Any reports filed will be dismissed as camping misadventure, as have a safe trip home. Below that, a final line in smaller text. Remember, we are always watching. Tyler grabbed the paper and crumpled it violently, throwing it toward the fire pit. This is insane. We have to report this. Police, FBI, someone. But even as he said it, doubt crept into his voice. Please, who would believe them? What evidence did they have? The mine would be empty by now, scrubbed clean. The people would have vanished. It would sound like a shared delusion, a story they'd concocted to explain getting lost in the woods. Ethan walked to his car and turned the key. The engine started immediately, purring smoothly as if it had never failed. He turned it off and looked at the others. We leave now. We stay together on the drive out. Once we are back in town, we write down everything that happened. Every detail. Then we decide together what to do next. It was the only plan that made sense. They packed in record time, throwing gear into vehicles without care for organization. Nobody wanted to spend another second in this place. As they prepared to leave, Nicole grabbed her camera and took one final photograph of the campsite. Later, when the film was developed, that image would show 7 young people standing by their cars, looking haunted and exhausted. But in the background, barely visible among the trees, were several figures in dark clothing. Watching, always watching. The drive out was silent and tense. The muddy road had indeed been cleared somehow, allowing them to navigate without difficulty. When they finally reached paved roads, the tension in the vehicles eased slightly, but never disappeared. They stopped at the first town they reached, a place called Millerton, population 3,000. They went directly to the sheriff's office. The sheriff, a man named Harold Briggs, listened to their story with increasingly skeptical expressions. When they finished, he sat back in his chair and sighed. "Kids, I think you had a scary experience camping and your imaginations ran wild. It happens. The woods can play tricks on you, especially at night. But experiments, underground facilities, that's movie stuff, not real life." They insisted. They gave details, coordinates, everything they could remember. Sheriff Briggs agreed to send a deputy out to check the mine, more to placate them than because he believed. But when the deputy returned hours later, he reported finding nothing. The mine entrance was completely collapsed, impassable. No signs of recent activity, no equipment, no tire tracks, nothing to support their story. Frustrated but not surprised, the cousins left the sheriff's office. They got hotel rooms for the night, none of them wanting to go home until they'd had time to process. They gathered in one room and typed up their accounts on a borrowed laptop from the hotel's business center. Each person wrote their version of events separately, then they compared notes. The stories aligned perfectly. Too perfectly, Veronica noted. Like they'd all been scripted, and thoughts sent chills through the group. Had they been drugged? Had their memories been manipulated somehow? Or had it all happened exactly as they remembered? Without evidence, without proof, they were left with nothing but their testimony and the psychological scars of the experience. Over the following days, they tried various avenues. They contacted local news stations, but their story was dismissed as a hoax. They reached out to the FBI, but their report was filed away without investigation. They hired a private investigator, but he found nothing beyond what they already knew. The mine existed, but it had been abandoned since the 70s. There were no records of government experiments, no paper trail, no witnesses. Months passed, then years. The cousins stayed close, bound together by shared trauma and unanswered questions. They all experienced lasting effects: nightmares, paranoia, difficulty trusting others. Nicole stopped taking photographs for 3 years. Tyler sold his guitar and never played music again. Olivia burned all her artwork and switched her major to accounting, something concrete and logical. Dylan became obsessed with surveillance technology, convinced he could find evidence of being monitored. Ethan broke off his engagement, unable to commit to a future that felt uncertain and fragile. 25 years passed. The cousins were now middle-aged, scattered across different states, connected by phone calls and occasional reunions. And the memory of that weekend never faded, but it became something they learned to live with. A dark chapter in their shared history that nobody else understood. Then, in the summer of 2022, everything changed. A hiker exploring abandoned mines in western North Carolina fell through a rotted section of floor into a chamber that shouldn't have existed. The emergency responders who retrieved him discovered something that immediately drew federal attention. The chamber was filled with equipment: old computers, monitoring systems, medical devices, and files. Then files. Dozens of boxes containing detailed records of experiments conducted from 1971 through 1998. The FBI seized everything. As they combed through the documents, they found references to something called Project Hollow Echo, a Black Ops research initiative studying psychological manipulation, advanced robotics, and something else. Something the reports referred to only as the Anomaly. a phenomenon discovered in the mines that seemed to affect human perception and consciousness in ways that defied explanation. Buried in the files was a folder labeled Test Group 7-97. Laid inside were photographs of 7 young people. Ethan Vale, Nicole Vale, Kevin Marsh, Veronica Marsh, Tyler Horn, Dylan Horn, and Olivia Grant. There were detailed notes on their backgrounds, their relationships, their psychological profiles. There were transcripts of radio transmissions, including the ones they'd heard on Dylan's CB. There were hourly reports tracking their movements, their emotional states, their decisions. And there was a final assessment report, dated July 21st, 1997. Subjects successfully completed stress protocol. All data collected. Long-term monitoring initiated. Notable result. Subjects demonstrated higher cohesion than predicted models. Recommend extended observation. Project continuation approved. The FBI contacted all 7 cousins. After 25 years of being dismissed, disbelieved and questioned, they were finally vindicated. It had all been real. Every moment, every terror, every manipulation. They'd been test subjects in an illegal government experiment, and the monitoring had never stopped. Federal investigators found evidence of continued surveillance on all 7 subjects, and their homes, their workplaces, their communications. And for 25 years, they'd been watched, studied. Their entire adult lives had been observed as part of the experiment's long-term effects assessment. The individuals responsible were never found. But the names in the files were aliases. The funding had been laundered through so many channels it became untraceable. Everyone officially connected to Project Hollow Echo was either dead or claimed ignorance. The government apologized, offered compensation, sealed the records for national security reasons. But certain questions remained unanswered. What was the anomaly they'd mentioned? What had been discovered in those mines that justified decades of illegal research? The files referenced it constantly but never explained it. Just vague mentions of perception shifts, reality distortions, consciousness alterations, and the kind of language that sounded like science fiction. In 2023, Dylan, who'd never stopped being paranoid, hired an expert to sweep his house for bugs. They found something. A device unlike any commercial surveillance equipment. And small, incredibly sophisticated, using technology the expert didn't recognize. When they tried to remove it, the device self-destructed, leaving no evidence of its existence. Dylan contacted the others. They all searched their homes. All of them found similar devices. That all of them self-destructed when tampered with. The FBI claimed ignorance. If such devices existed, they said, they weren't government issue. Perhaps private parties with access to the sealed files had continued monitoring independently. Perhaps the experiment had never really ended. Today, the 7 cousins remain in contact. But they meet once a year, always in a different location, always taking elaborate precautions to ensure they are not followed. And they still experience the symptoms. The paranoia, the nightmares, the persistent feeling of being watched. Because they are being watched. They know it now. They have accepted it. The experiment that began on July 18, 1997, continues. It will probably continue until they die. The anomaly was never explained to them. The government claims the relevant files were destroyed. But sometimes, when the cousins gather and share stories, they talk about what they felt in those tunnels. That sense of wrongness, of reality bending, and of being somewhere that existed between what was real and what was possible. They felt something down there, something that had been trapped in those tunnels long before Project Hollow Echo found it. Something that's still there now. The mine entrance was sealed with concrete in 2022, buried under tons of rock and earth, marked with warnings of instability and danger. But local residents report strange occurrences in that area. Lights in the forest where no trails exist. Sounds echoing from underground where nothing should echo. Hikers report feeling watched, feeling wrong, feeling like reality is slightly off in ways they can't quite articulate. The cousins know the truth. Whatever was discovered in those tunnels 26 years before they arrived is still there. still affecting things, still changing reality in subtle ways. They were just test subjects in an attempt to understand it, to weaponize it, to control it. And when that failed, they were left as permanent observation subjects, living evidence of the anomaly's long-term effects. They have stopped trying to convince others, stopped trying to expose the truth, because they learned something in those woods, in those tunnels, during those terrible days in July 1997. Some secrets are kept secret not to protect the powerful, but to protect everyone else. Some things are better left unknown. Some experiments should never have been conducted. But they were, and 7 ordinary people paid the price, are still paying it, will always pay it. Because once you have been touched by the anomaly, once you have been marked by Project Hollow Echo, you are never free again. You are a permanent exhibit in an ongoing experiment, the data point in research that has no end, the ghost haunted by your own life. The cousins learned to live with it, to find joy where they could, to maintain connections despite the horror of their shared experience. They survived. But survival isn't the same as escaping, and none of them will ever truly escape. The experiment continues. The watching continues. The anomaly continues. And somewhere in western North Carolina, deep beneath tons of concrete and stone, something waits in the darkness. Something that affects reality in ways we are not meant to understand. Something that was there before us and will be there after us. Something that used 7 young people as instruments to measure its effects. And perhaps in the silence of those sealed tunnels, it's still measuring, still testing, still waiting for the next subjects to stumble into its influence. 25 years later, the FBI found the evidence. But evidence without understanding is just documentation of the unknown. And some things the cousins realized long ago were never meant to be known. They can only be endured. They endure. And they remember. And they wait to see what comes next, because the experiment isn't over. It's never over. It just continues, invisible and inexorable, gathering data on lives that were supposed to be their own but never really were. The story of 7 cousins who went missing at a North Carolina lake in 1997 doesn't have an ending. It just has a long, terrible middle that stretches on, and somewhere, in files that officially don't exist, their data continues to accumulate. Forever. It's forever.